sixth episode of Luke Cage. Luke goes on a joyride with Claire Temple and the disgraced detective Scarf, and it looks like Cottonmouth's dealings have finally caught up with him. In the sixth episode of the series, Luke Cage went all Hulk on everything. He was smashing walls, beating up goons, and even allowing a van to plow right into him, which causes no damage whatsoever. This week's episode was pretty damn great, especially with the character of Scarf, who still I think is a snake-eating bastard. He still managed to be very helpful in bringing Cottonmouth down, despite the fact that he was going to try and kill him himself. In this episode, he ends up getting attacked by Cottonmouth, and then he ends up going to Pops' barbershop, where Luke Cage is, of course. He's looking for a little bit of protection, and he's trying to cover his own ass. The thing is, though, despite the fact that he is something of a true asshole, he wants to sort of redeem himself a little bit. He has information which is going to be crucial to bringing Cottonmouth down, and Luke Cage wants to be a part of all of this. Luke Cage could easily just walk into Cottonmouth's club and beat the ever-living shit out of him, but Luke wants true justice for Cottonmouth. He wants to see him behind bars. That would be the ultimate revenge against this guy, to get him out of Harlem and to let him rot in jail. Although, I don't think it would be that effective. As we all know from Daredevil, Wilson Fisk is doing just fine. I think one of the best parts about this episode is that we finally got to see a team-up between Claire Temple and Luke Cage. These two characters are really great, and they interact with each other in a really fantastic way. They kind of come across as like this brother-sister relationship, especially by the end of the episode when, hilariously, Luke Cage asks her if she wants to go and have some coffee. And we all know that in this series, that's code for let's go have sex, and of course, Claire Temple is not going to be having any of that. She's also reluctantly going to be along for the ride in this episode, as both her, Luke Cage, and Scarf are driving around for most of the episode trying to get to police headquarters, but they keep getting intercepted by Cottonmouth's goons. And there's this really great scene when they're back at the barbershop, and she's performing this sort of impromptu surgery by pulling the bullets out of his body. This was easily the most gruesome scene of the entire episode, and it just looked like it hurt so damn much. Especially that one where she heated up the tweezers and put it right into his leg to pull out that big, massive bullet. I was cringing the entire time. But honestly, in the back of my head, I was also thinking, you know what, Scarf? You kind of deserved this. Not to mention, you have to feel for the character of Misty Knight. Scarf was very instrumental in her becoming an effective detective. And she feels really bad by the fact that, one, he's missing. 2, he's actually been betraying the police force the entire time, and 3, by the end of the episode, he ends up succumbing to his wounds and dying right there in the streets. Although Luke Cage was able to save Claire Temple and everyone around them thanks to getting in front of that van, Scarf is going to die. However, his information is still incredibly valuable to the police, and by the end of the episode, Cottonmouth has been arrested by the police. Although we have to remember, he has a lot of police under his payroll, so they're probably going to find a way to get him out. As disturbing as Cottonmouth can be, I find his cousin was much more of an interesting character in this episode. Mariah Dillard. What I really loved about her in this episode is how she confronts Cottonmouth about how to kill Luke Cage. And I love how she's like, have you ever tried drowning him? Poisoning him? I can think of another few fucked up things that you could do to try and take this dude out. Of course, she words it a little differently than me. Still, it was a really effective scene, and it showed that she's becoming just as villainous as her cousin. Not to mention, there's this great scene in the episode where she's being interviewed by this news team who are basically there just to call her out on her bullshit. At first, it's under the pretense of just sort of a normal interview of her continuing to do what she's doing, which is to rebuild Harlem, giving it back to the people, the same old rhetoric that we've heard before, but they end up calling her out on the fact that she's been working with her cousin, who's a convicted murderer, a convicted felon, a frickin' gangster, and of course she wants nothing to do with this, and she immediately pulls the plug. And as soon as Cottonmouth is arrested, they immediately bombard her and start to try and ask her questions, and of course she has to dodge all of this. She's going to have to do a lot of cleanup, and I have a feeling Luke Cage is probably not going to help her out in that department. So what's the rundown on the 6th episode of Luke Cage? This was a really nice episode with much better pacing than the previous episode. What I really loved about it was just all of these different parties coming together. I love the fact that Scarf was working together with Luke Cage, albeit reluctantly, but it was a really great scene which added a lot of tenseness to it because they were trying to escape from Cottonmouth's goons, who are just on the freaking hunt in this episode. It was great. There was a certain lack of shades in this episode. He's a character that I really just want to keep seeing more of, just because of how mysterious he is and seeing what his connection is going to be to Diamondback. I mean, he's one of those few characters who can actually get underneath Cottonmouth's skin, and Cottonmouth in this episode went down hard, especially at the end. That was a really great sequence when he was being arrested, that final montage sequence. Again, doing what they did in the previous episodes by including music with it, it just adds so much atmosphere to all of those scenes. It's really great. I think one of the biggest things about this episode, though, was definitely the reunion between Claire Temple and Luke Cage, which at first was incredibly awkward, especially because of the way that they initially met. But still, I like that they were able to get over that stuff really quick, and I love watching them interact with each other. I mentioned in the last review that Rosario Dawson is kind of a distracting character, but only because it is simply Rosario Dawson, but I have to admit, she really is doing a great job with this character, and watching her interact with Luke has been one of my favorite things about the series. I really do feel for the character of Misty Knight in this episode, though. She went through a lot of bullshit, especially because she was partnered up with this other cop who was also under Cottonmouth's payroll, and throughout the entire episode, he's doing his damnedest to sort of dodge actually having to look after Scarf or going to try and find him, and by the end of the episode, Misty Knight manages to trick him by doing this fake phone call gag, where it seems like she's talking to someone higher up in the police and mentioning that her partner here doesn't want anything to do with Scarf or doesn't want to get involved in the investigation. And she actually got him on a recording explaining that basically he was working under Cottonmouth as well. She got him handcuffed and he went into the police as well. But by the end of the episode, as triumphant as that moment was when she sees Scarf there dying in the streets, it's a really sad moment. You truly do feel for the character. And it just makes me want to see what she's going to do for the rest of the series, who she's going to blame, how she's actually going to react to Luke from now on, because in many ways, if Luke Cage would have just gone right to the hospital, Scarf would have at least been able to have gotten that surgery. If they hadn't have just decided to go to the police station, things might have played out differently, and I have a feeling this is something that's really going to piss off Misty Knight as well. Overall, this was a really tense and fun episode of Luke Cage with a lot of tension, especially towards the end, and some pretty cool action scenes. It's still always fun to watch Luke Cage doing his thing, especially because nothing can hurt him. I love at the end when he's acting as a human shield, blocking all of the bullets, and then he just turns around and is like, alright, if that's the way it's gonna be, and he just gets in there and starts kicking some ass. I also really love the clever way that they evaded them at the end in the van by pulling into this alleyway, and then he punched a hole through the car and then through the wall just so that they could escape. It was all off-screen, of course, but we're starting to see a lot more of Luke Cage's superhero feats. Not just his overall raw power, but just his mobility. There's a scene where he jumps out of a window in this episode and just lands like a freaking badass. As Deadpool would say, it's the superhero landing, everyone does it. So yes, this was a great episode of Luke Cage. I really enjoyed this one a lot. There were a few scenes that I wish they could have cut down just a little bit, and I wish we could have gotten some more Luke Cage action. That being said, this is still a pretty solid episode of the series. I'm going to drop a 4 out of 5 on this one. Make sure to check it out, Luke Cage fans. But if any of you guys did watch this episode, make sure to tell me what you thought about it in the comments section below. Thank you guys so much for watching this review. I really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe, comment on the video, and like the video. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, stay dandy, baby.